Hey guys, welcome back to Rachel's studio, and in today's video we're going to talk about masking. What is it? How do you use it? And all kinds of good little yummy tips about how to use it. So let's go ahead and get started. But first, please remember to subscribe to this channel. I upload new videos every week. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. Leave me a comment or question in the comments, and I would love to chat with you there. And be sure to show me some algorithm love by watching this to the very end. And without further ado, let's just get started on all about masking. Okay, so what is masking? Okay, there are a lot of masking products out there, but basically what masking is, here is my masking. Basically what masking is, it's a liquid plastic that you can paint on with a lot of different painting and application instruments, and you let it dry on your paper, on your watercolor paper. You have to use good paper because otherwise it will tear your paper when you try to remove it. So you do have to use good watercolor paper with it. Then you can paint over the masking once it's dried, and it will save those little tidbits of white under the masking. So like, for example, if you want to mask out whiskers, you can use it to mask whiskers, put it on the whiskers and then paint as usual. And then at the very end of the painting, you remove the masking and behind is left the nice clean white paper. So that's basically in a nutshell what masking is for. It's to protect the white of your paper when you're doing a watercolor painting. Okay, so now that we know what masking is, let's talk about why you use it. In watercolor, you generally paint from light to dark, and as you cover the surface, it's not possible to paint in lights unless you use gouache or white ink or gel pen, which gives a bit of a different look that you may not want. To get truly sparkling whites, masking is really hard to beat. So you paint it on your white paper, let it dry, and then you can paint freely over it. This is important in watercolor because usually we watercolorists paint in big washes first to get base colors down, and then we work from larger to smaller details. There's actually a popular pouring technique also in watercolor where artists will mask really large areas, say a figure walking in the surf, and then they use a pour technique and completely cover the painting with loose, melting, blurring washes. They let that dry, and then they take the masking off, and then they paint the details in the main subject after they remove the masking from the main subject. If you look up watercolor pouring technique, I'm sure you'll find a lot of videos about it on YouTube. So to get to those beautiful little details to shine at the end, like whiskers, glints in the eyes, sparkles on water, splashes in waves, etc., masking really helps. By the way, all those extra little details are what I call jewelry. So be sure to check out my video that I did to explain the importance of jewelry in a painting. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give you my 10 tips about how to use masking. So let's talk about different things that you can use to apply it. And the sky's the limit. There's so many different things that you can do, but I can tell you some of the common ways that I use it. And I would say 9 times out of 10, what I use is a rigger. And there's a few reasons for this. One, a rigger, I'm usually using it to save the glint in the eye or the whiskers or little edges of the fur. That's usually what I use it for. The hairs of the brush on a rigger are long, so they hold a good amount of masking up in their bristles, so you don't have to keep re-dipping. So that is one advantage of using a rigger. The second advantage is that because of how it's shaped, a long, thin line, you can get really small little, very thin, delicate lines like in whiskers or small little areas like the glint in the eye. I use it a lot for that. Tip number 2 is you can use a calligraphy pen, and you can load these calligraphy pens with ink. You can also load them with masking. And so I haven't done this personally, but I have a friend who uses a calligraphy brush and she's told me about it, and I'm going to try this out. I just haven't yet, but it sounds like a great idea. There's also another tool that I've already covered in another video, and a lot of people really rave about it. So I'm going to show that to you right here. So what this is a ruling pen, and it is used mostly for masking in watercolor. And if you read the reviews of this thing on Amazon, for example, it will have a lot of comments where people are saying that it's life-changing and they really love it. Now, I prefer my rigger still. I'm used to it, but
This is worth mentioning because so many people really love it. So what you saw me doing right there was widening the mouth of it so you can widen it for wider lines, and then you can make the little jaws go in to make more fine lines. So you can see here how fine a line you can get with it. The thing that I don't really like about it is that you have to keep reloading it, so that's why I don't really use this, but I did go ahead and buy one. Here I'm making a bit of a broader stroke, and you see how often I have to reload it. You can get a bunch of masking in a brush and then load it into the ruling pen. That would probably be more effective than using this small little cup that I'm using now.
Another tool that you can use with your masking is a credit card or the edge of like 300-pound watercolor paper, and you dip you dip the credit card in the masking or your edge of 300-pound watercolor paper, and then you can almost use it like a stamp and stamp out really long, thin lines, like maybe fence posts, sapling trees, or anything that requires a long straight line. Another tip, a tool that you can use is a toothbrush or any kind of floppy brush, and load it up with a little bit of masking, and then you splatter it on. And now I use this technique in my wave painting tutorial, so be sure to check out my wave painting, and you can see how I splattered on some masking in order to create kind of like an ocean spray look. So that can be really fun to use it for anytime you have a bunch of ocean spray or a splattered look. Before we get too far in this video, I want to make sure that I cover something very important, and that is to use soap in the bristles of your brush. If you're using a brush, what I do is I dip the rigger, usually it's a rigger, I dip the rigger in water, then I scrub it around on a bar of soap. Any kind of soap is fine. And then usually I shape the end of my brush to get it in a nice point, and then I dip it in the masking so that I have a nice tip. The soap kind of holds it in that nice tip formation also. But the most important thing about using soap on your brush is to protect the bristles, so that if your masking gets a little too dry, it won't stick in the bristles, because once you get masking stuck in the bristles of your paintbrush will be completely ruined. Now, here's a little sub tip. I did read from someone that you can use Goo Gone on masking and remove the masking from your brush bristles that way. I have not tried that, but it sounds like it would work. So if any of you have tried that, do tell. Does it really work? Okay, another tip that I have, I add a little bit of paint. So first I get some cream consistency paint in my little holder, and I usually use a little container like this. I mix a little bit of cream consistency in the bottom, and then I pour a tiny bit of masking, you don't need a lot, into this small container. It's a plastic, it's just a mailing tube top, but you can use any small plastic container. Once the masking dries, it'll be easy to remove it out of this container or whatever you use, so it won't damage any plastic or glass you put it on. But I don't like to dip directly out of the masking bottle, just because I don't want to expose it to too much air and then get it too dry. I should mention the actual masking that I use. I have always liked this, a product by Winsor & Newton. It's removable masking, and it doesn't have any pigment in it. And be sure you get removable, though. They do make permanent, and then that will really rain on your parade when you realize you bought the wrong masking. I've done it. My next tip is to don't use too much masking. If you use too much masking, the things that you masked will start to look glued on, pasted on. They'll have hard edges. They won't look natural. So just keep in mind that you don't want to mask out everything. If you have a big white spot, just paint around it. You don't need masking for that. Use your masking only for those little areas like eye glints or whiskers or little edges of the fur that you want to have a little extra texture. It'll look too stilted. Which leads me to my next tip, which is to use a scrubber after you have removed the masking, which I will get to about when to remove your masking. But first, let's talk about the scrubber. I always use a scrubber after I've removed my masking. And a scrubber is a watercolor brush that you can buy. Royal & Langnickel makes my favorite. I use a size 2 stiff scrubber. And for example, after I remove the masking off of my whiskers, I'll scrub the very tip end of the whisker that meets the cat's or dog's face right here to soften it, to kind of blend and merge it together so that it doesn't look pasted on. Okay, that leads me to my next tip, which is when to remove the masking. A lot of people have asked me this, and you remove your masking when everything behind that masking, like the cat's face, is as dark as you want. There's no more big details to put in. You've got all the paint done. The painting is basically done. That's when you remove your masking. And after you remove your masking, then you can do the final scrubbing, final little tiny details, and then it's done. So just leave your masking on to the end is what I would recommend.
All right, it is bonus time. Let's go over a few extra masking don'ts. Don't use a blow dryer on it. If you do that, it will merge the plastics with your paper and it won't be removable anymore. Another don't is don't leave masking in your brush too long. And when you're applying masking, be sure to rinse out your paintbrush every few minutes so that it doesn't ever have a chance to dry at all in your bristles, because even if you use soap in your bristles, you run the risk of it drying in your bristles and then you won't be able to get it out. All right, my other don't is don't use it with cheap paper, because when you remove it, it will take up some of the paper when you rub off the masking, so it just won't work with cheaper papers. You really need to use good quality cotton, artist grade watercolor papers. Like I use Arches cold press, 140-pound, hot press would work. Other tools you can use with masking include a bamboo calligraphy stick, a color shaper, which has a kind of a cylinder on the end, and it's just plastic, and you can use it to push paint around, but you can also use it to apply masking. I never use these things because you have to reload them so frequently. But I also read in the comments of one video who this guy, he took a cheap brush, he splayed the bristles, and then he put masking on it and let it dry. So he let the masking dry in the brush, and then he repeated that process, adding a few layers of masking to this splayed out brush. So it kind of looks like an octopus with its legs spread out, you know? And then you let the masking completely dry in the brush, so that becomes permanent, just so you know. But then you can use that as a tool to create really random, interesting textures with masking. I have not tried that, but that would be a fun thing to try.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial about what is masking and how to use it. And I upload new videos every week, remember, so be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in next week's tutorial. Bye, you guys. Anyway.